Imagine carrying a dream so sacred, so personal, and watching it slowly die year after year. That was Hannah's reality. She wasn't just a woman who wanted a child. She was a woman expected to bear children in a world where fertility defined worth. In ancient Israel, motherhood was more than a blessing. It was an identity, a legacy, even a form of survival. But Hannah's womb was silent, and with every passing season, that silence grew heavier, turning into an ache that no one around her seemed to truly understand. Can you feel that? The weight of prayers unanswered, of time passing and nothing changing. She likely counted the days, waited through the months, hoped during every festival, only to end each year in the same place, empty, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. This wasn't a small grief. It was the kind that follows you home, that crawls into your bed at night, that makes even joy feel like betrayal. And what's worse, this wasn't a private sorrow, no. Her barrenness was visible, talked about, gossiped over. Her pain was public. And in a culture where children were seen as a sign of God's favor, what did that make her? Forgotten. Forsaken. You see, Hannah wasn't just broken by biology. She was broken by expectation. By a society that measured her by what she couldn't produce, by the cruel arithmetic of value and shame. Have you ever felt like that? Like the thing you long for most is the very thing that defines you, and yet it remains out of reach? But here's what makes her story so powerful. She didn't give up. Even when heaven seemed silent and people misunderstood her pain, Hannah still carried that fragile seed of faith in her heart. A faith that would soon meet the God who sees. The God who hears mouth, the God who answers not only prayers but tears. So before the miracle, before the vow, before Samuel was even a thought in her womb, there was just a woman weeping, waiting, breaking, and yet she kept believing. It wasn't just the ache of barrenness that Hannah had to endure. It was the voice of Peninnah, her rival, her tormentor, a woman who had what Hannah desperately longed for, children, and who used that gift not with humility but with pride. Year after year, Peninnah rubbed salt into Hannah's open wound, and they weren't strangers passing, but they were family, living under the same roof, sharing the same man, breathing the same air. There was no escape. Can you picture it? The whispered comments, the not-so-subtle boasts, the glances across the room. Look at my children. So many blessings. Oh, Hannah, are you still praying? The way Peninnah weaponized her fertility was cruel but not uncommon, because when people are insecure or jealous, they often attack those who suffer in silence, and Hannah? She suffered quietly, until even her silence became unbearable. The Bible tells us that Peninnah provoked her bitterly to irritate her. Not once, not twice, but constantly, every year, especially when they went to the house of the Lord, the place where Hannah hoped to find peace, became the very place where she was most humiliated. And yet, isn't that how life sometimes works? Just when you're trying to be faithful, when you're seeking God the most, that's when the voices around you and sometimes within you grow loudest. Why are you still believing? Where is your God now? You're not enough. And those voices, like Peninnah's, are not always external. Sometimes they're echoes inside our own hearts. But Hannah didn't retaliate. She didn't return insult for insult. Her pain didn't make her bitter. It made her desperate, desperate enough to bring it all before God. Because when people mock you, when the world misunderstands you, when even your own household becomes a battleground, there's still one who hears. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had something deeper, a cry that reached heaven. And sometimes the loudest prayers are the ones the world never hears. But God never misses. There comes a point when words just don't work anymore. When your heart is so full of ache, your soul so weighed down, that speaking feels useless. That's where Hannah was. Standing in Shiloh, the sacred place of worship, but too broken to speak aloud. No fancy prayers, no rehearsed phrases, just silent sobs, lips trembling, words caught in her throat. Her pain became prayer. She wasn't just visiting a holy place. She was laying herself bare before the one who sees it all. Her body rocked with emotion, tears streamed down her cheeks, and still, no sound came out. People around her might have assumed she was fine. But internally, she was pouring out everything. Every disappointment, every unanswered question, every bitter memory of Peninnah's mockery. This wasn't just prayer. It was surrender. And isn't it beautiful that our God understands prayers with no sound? That he reads trembling lips and shattered hearts better than the most eloquent sermon? Hannah wasn't offering a performance, she was offering her pain. And heaven was listening, but the world misread her. Even Eli, the priest, watching from nearby, assumed the worst. He thought she was drunk, out of control. Isn't that just like life? You finally muster the courage to pour your soul out, and someone judges you, misunderstands you. But Hannah didn't let that stop her. She didn't shrink away or grow defensive. She calmly explained, "I have poured out my soul before the Lord." And that's the key, isn't it? Not just praying to God Almighty, but pouring out your soul. No filter, no pretending. Just real, raw faith in the middle of pain. That's what moves heaven. Not volume, not perfection, but sincerity. Authentic, broken, surrendered prayer. So if you've ever prayed and felt like your words fell flat, if you've ever cried in silence and wondered if God heard, remember Hannah. Her silent cry changed everything. As Hannah stood in silent agony, pouring out her soul before the Lord, she was not alone. Watching her from a distance was Eli, the high priest, a man chosen to oversee God's house, a spiritual leader, and yet, in that moment, completely wrong. He saw a woman trembling, mouthing words, weeping uncontrollably, and he assumed the worst. "How long will you be drunk?" he asked, rebuking her as if she were a disgrace. It's a harsh moment, painfully human, a reminder that even those meant to guide us spiritually can sometimes misunderstand what God is doing in our lives. Eli didn't see a woman of deep prayer. He saw a problem. He didn't hear her heart. He jumped to conclusions, and isn't that something we all face? You're in the middle of your most vulnerable moment, finally breaking down before God, and someone misreads your pain, criticizes your cry, labels your grief as weakness. But Hannah, oh Hannah, she didn't respond with bitterness. She didn't lash out in defense. She answered with grace, saying, "No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord." Her humility speaks volumes. In the face of judgment, she stays soft. And her truth pierces through Eli's assumptions like light, cutting through fog. Suddenly, Eli's posture changes. His tone softens. He realizes he wasn't speaking to a drunken woman, but to a woman of faith, a woman battling private storms with public courage. And he does something powerful. He blesses her. "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." That shift from accusation to affirmation was more than a change in tone. It was divine alignment. God used even Eli's mistake to create a turning point. It was a holy confirmation that Hannah had been seen, not just by a priest, but by heaven itself. Sometimes we're misunderstood by the people around us, but God never misjudges the heart. Where people see chaos, he sees courage. Where they see weakness, he sees worship. And where they assume failure, he knows the fullness of your faith. Something remarkable happened the moment Hannah finished her prayer. Something subtle, almost easy to overlook, yet deeply profound. Scripture says, "Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast." Just like that. No booming voice from heaven. No angelic visitation. No immediate miracle. Her womb was still empty. Her situation hadn't changed. But she had, and that is the mystery and beauty of faith. That you can leave the same place where you poured out your sorrow and still walk away in peace because you know deep in your bones that God heard you. This wasn't denial or delusion. This was divine assurance. Something shifted inside her spirit. She had cried until there were no more tears. She had laid everything bare at the feet of God. And when she got up, something had lifted. Her burden had transferred. She didn't carry it anymore. She had handed it over. Not to a man, not to a system, but to the Almighty. Have you ever experienced that kind of peace? When your circumstances are still broken, but your heart isn't? When the pain is still real, but your soul is steady? That's what happened to Hannah. Her face changed, not because her situation changed, but because her focus changed. No longer consumed by what she lacked, she was now centered in the one who lacked nothing. It's such a quiet miracle. So, unlike the loud signs we often ask for, but it's just as powerful. Sometimes the miracle happens not outside of us, but within us. God doesn't always change the storm. Sometimes He changes us in the middle of it. And that's what the world can't explain. That's what faith looks like. A woman walking away from the altar with no proof, just peace, no evidence, just trust. Her face wasn't downcast anymore because she had encountered the presence of the God who sees, who hears, who remembers. And maybe that's exactly what some of us need today. Not a resolution, not an answer, not a yes, but that moment of divine clarity where our soul says, "It is well." Even if nothing around us has changed yet, something inside us has. There's a line in Scripture that carries more power than it seems at first glance. It simply says, "And the Lord remembered her." That's it, so short yet so sacred. God remembered Hannah. Now don't misunderstand this. It's not that God had forgotten her, as if her name slipped His mind. No, when the Bible says that God remembered, it means that He acted. It means that the time had come, that the prayers she whispered in the silence, the tears she shed in the dark, the pain she couldn't explain to anyone, none of it had been lost. Every sigh, every word, every heartbeat had been heard by heaven. And now it was time. She conceived. The very womb that had been closed was now carrying promise. The emptiness that had once defined her identity was now being filled by divine purpose. Her long wait was not in vain. God had been working all along, in the background, in the unseen, in the waiting. And here's what's beautiful. This miracle didn't come because Hannah got stronger, or louder, or more righteous. It came because God is faithful. Because He is the kind of God who sees the lowly, hears the desperate, and honors the humble. He is the God who remembers. Maybe today you feel forgotten, overlooked, prayers unanswered, silence too heavy. But I need you to know this. Heaven does not ignore the cries of the brokenhearted. God remembers, not just in theory, not just in spirit, but with action, with movement, with divine timing that always arrives right on time, even when it feels late to us. Hannah's story is not just about a barren woman who had a baby. It's about a God who keeps His promises, a God who moves when the world has given up, a God who writes redemption into the places we thought were permanently closed. When God remembers you, everything changes. And when her son was born, she held him in her arms and named him Samuel, a name that means because I asked the Lord for him. Think about that. His very name was a testimony, not just a name but a declaration, a story wrapped in syllables. Every time she whispered his name, she was saying, God heard me. Every time she looked into his eyes, she remembered the altar, the tears, the vow, the silence, and the moment heaven broke through. For years, Hannah had been known by what she lacked. Her identity was shaped by absence, the absence of children, the absence of social worth, the absence of joy. But now, everything had shifted. What once was her greatest sorrow had become her loudest praise. Samuel was more than a child. He was a miracle, a reminder that God responds not just to words but to hearts, not just to public prayers but to silent, trembling faith. Can you imagine that moment, holding the very thing she thought she would never have, stroking the face of answered prayer, breathing in the scent of fulfilled promise? No one could take that away from her. Not Peninnah, not the years of silence, not even the pain that had once consumed her. Because now Samuel was here, and his name would echo her testimony for generations. And isn't that what faith is? Believing so deeply, so fiercely, that one day your answered prayer walks into your arms and you get to say, this is what I prayed for. Maybe today your Samuel hasn't arrived yet. Maybe the waiting room feels endless. But take heart. Hannah's story is a reminder that delay is not denial, that sometimes the best miracles take time to form, not just in the womb, but in the heart, because when it finally comes, you won't just receive a blessing, you'll carry a testimony. And maybe, like Hannah, you'll name it Samuel. Imagine this: after years of desperate waiting, countless prayers soaked in tears, and the joy of finally holding her miracle child, Hannah makes the most unthinkable decision. She gives him back, not out of obligation, not because she was forced, but because she had made a vow, a sacred promise whispered through brokenness. If you give me a son, I will give him back to you. And now, the time had come. Can you feel the weight of that moment? The child she nursed, sang to, kissed goodnight, now dressed for a new life, a new home, a calling she had once only imagined. She walks to Shiloh, not to beg for a miracle, but to surrender it, step by step, holding Samuel's tiny hand, knowing that each one brings her closer, not to a cradle but to an altar. This wasn't just about keeping a promise. This was an act of raw, radical trust. Hannah wasn't giving Samuel away. She was placing him into the hands of the very God who had heard her cry, the God who had proven faithful. And in that she knew Samuel was safest not in her arms but in God's purpose. Let's be honest, surrender is never easy, especially when it means releasing something you love deeply. But sometimes, the truest form of worship is letting go. And this part of Hannah's story, it confronts us because it asks, what are you willing to release back to God? Your dreams, your answered prayers, the very things you once begged Him for? Sometimes faith isn't just about receiving, it's about releasing, trusting that what you place in God's hands will be used for something far greater than what you could ever build on your own. Hannah gave Samuel to the Lord, and in doing so she gave Israel a prophet, a kingmaker, a spiritual giant. Because when we give our best back to God, He multiplies it beyond imagination. Hannah likely faded into the background of history after she fulfilled her vow. She wasn't a queen. She didn't part seas or call down fire from heaven. She didn't lead armies or write sacred laws. She was simply a mother, a woman who wept, who prayed, who waited, and who kept her word to God. And yet her legacy echoes through eternity, because her son, Samuel, didn't just become any man. He became the prophet who would anoint Israel's first kings. He became the voice of God in a generation clouded by chaos. He became a turning point in Israel's story, and it all began with a mother who trusted God more than her own heart. You see, Hannah's story teaches us something the world often overlooks, that spiritual greatness often begins in obscurity, in silence, in faithfulness no one else sees. Her legacy wasn't built in palaces or through political power. It was born through surrender, through faith, and through the whispered prayers of a woman who believed God could do the impossible. Think about this. Samuel's prophetic authority, his discernment, his strength, all of that was shaped in part by the atmosphere of prayer and devotion his mother created. Before he ever heard the audible voice of God, he had heard the sound of his mother praying. Before he ever stood before kings, he had seen his mother kneel before the King of Heaven. And isn't that the power of a faithful life? It might not always be loud, it might not always be seen, but when someone decides to trust God radically and obey Him fully, the ripple effects can last for generations. So maybe you feel unseen, maybe your prayers feel small, but remember Hannah. Remember her story. What the world forgets, heaven remembers. What feels ordinary, God makes eternal. Your faithfulness matters more than you know. And sometimes the most powerful legacy is the one built on your knees. Hannah's story isn't just a beautiful moment frozen in biblical history. It's a timeless reminder that God still hears. He hasn't gone silent. He hasn't forgotten how to listen. And He certainly hasn't stopped responding to the cries of the broken-hearted. You may not be standing at the tabernacle like Hannah. Maybe you're in your bedroom, holding your breath, in the dark. Maybe you're driving in silence, screaming in your soul while the world keeps moving around you. Or maybe your tears have dried up, and all that's left is a numb ache you can't even put into words. But the same God who heard Hannah's voiceless prayer hears you too. He hears the prayers you whisper and the ones you can't bring yourself to say. He understands the language of your silence. He counts your tears. He sees your disappointment, your confusion, your longing, and he draws near, not in judgment, but in compassion. And let's be honest, waiting is hard. Hope can feel heavy. Faith can feel fragile. But Hannah's life proves that the delay is not a denial, that the silence of God does not mean the absence of God, that when nothing seems to be happening, something sacred is being shaped. So don't give up. Don't stop praying. Don't stop believing. Whether your breakthrough comes today or years from now, or in a way you never expected, know this: the God who answered Hannah still answers today. He hasn't changed. He is still the God who gives joy to the barren, purpose to the forgotten, and songs to those who once wept in silence. Hannah walked into the temple in tears, but she walked out with peace. That peace didn't come because her circumstances changed overnight. It came because she entrusted her pain to the one who holds eternity in his hands, and that same peace, that same hope, is still available for you today, because he still hears and he still cares, always.